It's done through entertainment. We're entertained so much. And I removed the TV from my home years ago. And I did it because I realized that they wanted me to be so entertained and so busy with my imagination elsewhere that I wasn't going to figure out the rules of this place in order to break out of it. And the reality is that we're giving our own sovereignty away. We're giving it away to a third party, not only to the set of experts in our society, the judges, the lawyers, the doctors, the accountants, the financial planners, etc. So we're not walking on the true ground. And ultimately, we don't believe that we have the capacity to run our own lives and really get ourselves out of this mess.
So here's the big question. How do everyday people like us who didn't grow up wealthy and were not taught how to be wealthy in school, how are we supposed to learn to think, invest, and grow wealth like the top 1% without compromising our ethics and our values? My name is Jeremy Whaley. That was my big question. This podcast will give you the answers. You're listening to Think Rich Radio. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Think Rich Radio. I'm your host, Jeremy Whaley. It's so great to be with you today. And this is our first episode in actually about 3 or 4 years. We're kind of revamping the show. In fact, you're going to notice a new face. It is my good friend, Nelson Bran. And Nelson and I have been talking recently. We said we wanted to do a podcast, and I was telling him about my previous show, and he said, well, let's relaunch that. And so we're actually doing this with a whole new format. You'll notice it's not an audio-first format. It's a video-first format. We're going to be doing conversations, and I'm so excited to start it and to launch it with my fantastic friend, Nelson. Nelson, welcome to my ecosphere, and let's do this thing. Are you excited about it?
I'm completely stoked, brother, and like you and I were talking before, there's nothing like giving value first to the people. There's nothing like being able to do something where it's human to human in a world surrounded by bots and AI. What's wrong with that humanness, right? And let's see if we can give some valuable, short 20, 30-minute videos of substance to people where they can grow and learn and possibly join us in our adventure. How's that?
Absolutely. And so I want to just kind of bring the listeners into what we've been talking about. We've been having these great phone conversations now for 6 months, and sometimes they just go on for hours. And we started saying we should be recording some of these conversations because we have such great conversation. And it really fits in with the premise of what Think Rich Radio started back in 2019 when I first launched this podcast. So I'm going to kind of set that pre-frame, and then let's talk about how that's all going to weave through. That'll be kind of our first episode here. Back when I started with this question. How is it that those of us who did not grow up wealthy, we were not taught how to be wealthy in school, how is it that we're supposed to learn to invest and grow wealth like the top 1% without compromising our ethics and our values? And I think that captures where so many people in our society are. It's like, how do I win the rat race? How do I break out of this thing that they taught me in school of go to school, get a job, get a career, work, and eventually you get old enough and you have money. And as you and I have been talking so much lately, that's not the reality. The paradigm is broken. So I'm going to tee that up for you, and let's just start there and see where we land.
So to your point, Jeremy, I've recently, you and I met through a particular project that we were involved in, and now we've been involved in multiple projects that are regarding cryptocurrencies and digital assets. And so in that process, you and I have had conversations about, to your point, how does someone break out of this paradigm that used to be very good for our parents and their parents, where they went to school, they got a degree, they got a job with benefits, and they maxed out their 401k or their pension, and they retired successfully, and they paid off their homes and so forth. How did we go from that paradigm to the new one, where in spite of a 401k or a pension, people max out their retirement, and at the end they're left with an average of $200,000 to $300,000, and they're still fully capable, fully functioning. They're not ill, and they're in their late 60s. How is it they're not going to outlive whatever retirement they have? And so you and I looked at that, and I told you that through the multiple projects we've been involved, I've had conversations with retired policemen, retired teachers, retired professors, retired of all kinds, even doctors, who in the end are realizing that the rate of inflation, at least the true rate of inflation, is gobbling up their savings faster than what their savings is. And so that's what led us into some of these conversations of, well, what are the challenges right now? Well, one of the first challenges is our true rate of inflation is probably in excess of 10% right now. If we look at the CPI and we include the groceries and the car repairs and the home insurance, the car insurance, the health insurance, the taxes, the travel, the tips, and all these things that the CPI does not include, I believe with my mathematics that we're at 13.8%. And so suddenly when you go to a bank and someone says, hi, would you like to open a savings account for a whole 1% yield per year? And because our moms in our society taught us, save your money, it's the best thing to do, that's what we end up doing. Or we go into that other thing we're taught, which is get a mutual fund or get a CD and park the money for a year or so, and it'll give us a 4 to 5% yield. That again is a losing strategy in this market. That coupled with so it's a high rate of inflation, and then our money, it doesn't grow. It doesn't grow, meaning if we park it, the return is so trivial that we become more poor as we save. So one, the rate of inflation is too high. Two, our money is not allowed to work for us. And third is the taxation. We're taxed at 20 to 40%, and that does not include the taxes we pay on the gasoline we put into our vehicles, the repair we put into our cars, the clothing that we buy, the movie theater tickets, the going out on weekends, the trips and so forth. We're taxed on top of tax on top of tax at local, state, and federal. And so you put those three things together, and that really describes this inability to get off of this hamster wheel. How can we ever get off of that, right? And then we're taught, lastly, to doubt anything that might get us off that hamster wheel, right? And we're taught that because we're taught that this is a fearful place where we where we live, where everything's dangerous. The news is all danger and calamity and chaos, and stay home, be safe. In fact, nowadays, when we leave one another, what's the first thing we tell one another? Be safe. We don't say be abundant, be productive, strive, go take a chance, go risk it all. No, we don't say that. We say be safe. Why? Because we're so inculcated with this is a fearful place where we live. How's that for the start?
Well, yeah, I think you've really encaptured the struggle, and you described in more technical terms what a lot of people feel. A lot of people don't know why they feel it. You know, I think about people like my mother, who I dearly love, 76 years old, and all she knows is it's a lot harder than she thinks it should be. And she's not quite sure why. And I think it comes back to 1972 when Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard, and the American people don't even realize what happened. And, you know, we talk about this idea of inflation. Most people don't really know what inflation is, but it's the fact that our money just doesn't go as far as it used to. And it's getting worse and worse. And what people feel is what you just described. They feel, oh, I can't buy as much. My taxes are killing me. I'm on a hamster wheel. No matter how much money I earn, it's still not enough. I was on the phone yesterday with a client of mine. She was telling me how great her kids are doing, how proud she is of them. They're all earning almost $200,000 a year, and they're just in their early 40s. And she's like, at my early 40s, I was earning, I think it was like, $36,000 a year or something like that. And I didn't have the heart to break it to her that, look, your kids at 200 grand this year are behind where you were at 36 grand 40 years ago. And that's the state of where we are. Everything has changed, and most people don't realize it. There are conversations about it, but what I want to do with this show, what our conversations have been, is opening up doors, opening up conversations, opening up opportunities so that people say, oh, this is where we can go, and we can start to collectively get out of the hamster wheel, get out of the rat race, get off the hamster wheel, and have those conversations. Because if we don't do this, and if people collectively, if we don't have this conversation, we will truly only have an upper class and a lower class. There will be no middle class. And the top 1% will actually be the top 0.01%. You know, the 1% right now is defined as roughly $600,000 a year or more. Sounds like a lot to a lot of people. I know a lot of people making 600 grand that feel like they don't have enough money. So that's the state of affairs.
It is. And to your point, my friend, it's done through entertainment. We're entertained so much. And I removed the TV from my home years ago. And I did it because I realized that they wanted me to be so entertained and so busy with my imagination elsewhere that I wasn't going to figure out the rules of this place in order to break out of it. And in this case, it's done through community, and that's what we're building here. And it's also done through those difficult conversations, because sometimes people will say, Nelson, that's what the government's for. That's what the bureaucrats are for. That's what the politicians are for. Let them handle it. It's above my pay grade. And the reality is that we're giving our own sovereignty away. We're giving it away to a third party, not only to the set of experts in our society, the judges, the lawyers, the doctors, the accountants, the financial planners, etc. And in so doing, we're hoping that Social Security works out. We're hoping that somehow our dollar can buy more tomorrow than it does today. We're hoping inflation doesn't continue to occur. We're praying that taxation rewinds and reverses. So we're not walking on the true ground. And again, it's being done through, we become docile through enough entertainment. We become detached from it because that's why the expert classes exist. And ultimately, we don't believe that we have the capacity to run our own lives and really get ourselves out of this mess. And that's what you and I have been talking about for the last few months, that unless we start to look at the world differently and say, you know what, if I go about it the way society and my teachers and my parents and my church told me to do so, I'm going to end up broke. I'm going to end up doing what a lot of boomers are having to do, which is selling their homes because they're outliving their savings. They're selling their homes because they're house rich and cash poor. They have no choice. And so going back to the 1% or the wealth class, who are able to transfer their wealth from generation to generation and grow it generation to generation because of a few set of things that they're doing that we're not. We can't even touch that from our perspective, following the rules within what they've given us. So we have no choice but to say, okay, I can't do legacy conditions and rules anymore, because if I do, I end up in a condition where I have to go back as a senior citizen to Walmart as a greeter, start driving as an Uber driver. Now, I'm not being critical of any of those people who do that. I'm just saying that the senior class didn't have to do that in our parents' generation, nor their parents' generation, because the old paradigm worked. I'm simply saying that those set of circumstances and rules no longer work in this new environment.
Right. And it's only getting worse. And you said a couple of things that I really want to tap into. You mentioned the word sovereignty. You know, this is a word that in our culture has completely disappeared. I think most people can't even define the word sovereignty. What it refers to, even though we talk about it, we're a sovereign nation. People don't really understand what that means. We're not just a sovereign nation. We are individual sovereign people under our nation on the planet. That's actually what our nation was founded on. The whole concept of freedom and individualism is the story they sold us about America, but what they've converted it into is this safety net. And so, you know, I'm married an immigrant. You work a lot with immigrants. We both understand that people that don't grow up in America, they don't have the same perspective that we have. People that don't grow up here will show up here with no money in their pocket, no right to work, no green card, and they find a way. And then you've got Americans, and we're supposed to be, you know, the most privileged, and we find a way to self-subject to modern slavery in a different form. That's not in a racial sense, but in a biological sense, where we're literally selling our energy in exchange for barely getting by, just enough to survive. So it's a different form of slavery. I hate to use that word, but that's what it is. And sovereignty, when people recognize that I'm a sovereign person, and if I want to be a sovereign person, I have the choice to either claim it or not claim it. And when people recognize that, now they realize I'm making a free will decision. I'm either going to go into the system, and if you're going to go into the system, you get safety, but you get terrible results, or I'm going to go against the system. And if I go against it, it's a wild ride, But that's where all the opportunity for sovereignty is. And that is the essence of the American dream.
It is. It is. Unfortunately, Jeremy, when we solve for safety and security and predictability and certainty, we end up getting a savings account. We end up putting our money in the CDs. We end up going the traditional route. And I'm not speaking against any financial planner, any fiduciary, any family office guy, any attorney. I'm not licensed to give any sort of financial advice to anyone. I'm a guy who's taken a particular route, as have you, and we've had a level of success, and I can speak to that insofar as experience is concerned. But we can no longer have that sovereignty without becoming independent, without becoming self-reliant. If we don't claim our autonomy, then we're really not sovereign, because he who does not control his or her own money isn't truly free.
That's it.
And go ahead, Jeremy.
No. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I thought you were done there. You mentioned something about safety, and something I've been thinking about a lot lately, because I had a conversation with a guy who's so opposed to risk. And he was sitting on, we'll say $500,000, a little bit, maybe a little bit more than that, coming into retirement in the next 5 years. And he's paranoid. He's like, I can't stop working. And the reason he can't stop working is because he looks at the numbers, he sees what he spends, and he realizes if he stops working, he's going to have about 5 or 6 years before he runs out of money. We'll come back to that in a second. But as I was talking to him, I was showing him all these different things that you and I have been working on, and the returns that we're getting and the cash flow that we're solving for. And I've used that term with him several times. I said, you need to solve for cash flow. You know, a person can have the greatest net worth in the world and be completely broke, and a person can live indefinitely with no net worth. It's not about net worth. In fact, most people don't have a very good net worth, and they live just fine their entire lifetime. But a person can't survive even a week or two without cash flow, because cash flow is how we survive. So I was trying to teach this to him and help him understand it. But he was so married to certainty, so married to, I need a guarantee of this. And I just blurted out the words, how much is that costing you? And that was something I've been thinking about. How much does risk actually cost? Like, people are solving for safety, but what they're giving up in exchange for safety is costing them infinitely more than what they can earn. Does that make sense? Did I say that well?
I think that's perfectly said, my friend. It's interesting how, and the whole safety thing really does bother me, my friend. It does, because I feel like in the last few years, we have safe spaces. We have words and terms that can't be used because they're offensive. And we've really become a very careful, cautious, timid, delicate being. And in solving for safety, I believe perhaps we have more safety. Maybe we do. But to your point, at what cost, right? Now we're all more homogenized, right? Now we're all staying on our lanes, doing the things we're supposed to do. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and I shared this with you before. He said, Nelson, can you give me a few examples of when you say that we're in some level of modern slavery? That seems like such an exaggerated way to put it. I said, let's talk about our insurances. In our country, we're forced to have health insurance, car insurance, and house insurance. Why? Because we are a very well obeying, inculcated consumer of materialism. And so because we've done what we've been bred to do, which is spend and consume every last dollar that we make, they're very cognizant, they're conscious that we're not going to have a savings in case of an accident to our home, an accident to our car, an accident to our personal health. So they've gone ahead and agreed to save on our behalf. And when a problem happens, they're there to save us and say, here you go. That's how little respect we have as individuals. Not only do we not have that ability to save for ourselves, they know we won't. It goes further than that. They say, we'll do it because you're a well-trained spending machine. And proof of that is, beyond our salaries, we're given credit cards. Credit cards that aren't backed by anything, with a super high interest rate. And those get maxed. And by the way, we can pay a minimal interest rate per month on those credit cards that we max. And so once we exceed our salary and once we exceed our credit cards, we can always tap into the equity of our homes. So they've taught us to not only be a good spender and a good consumer, but also to steal from our future selves in the form of high interest credit cards, in the form of tapping our own equity. And so my friend goes on to say, how can you prove that? And I said, well, look at all the storage facilities at every other exit on every highway across America. Why? They exist because once we put all the junk in our garages and in our attics, and we can no longer, we've run out of space. We got another bunker in our backyard as well. Now we need a third party garage. It's a storage facility. That's been one of the biggest boom industries right now for the last decade. Why? Because we're such a well-trained seal that only knows how to consume things that we don't even know what's in that storage facility. We don't even know what's in there. We just pay it every month, 150, 200, 350 every single month.
It's funny you mentioned that. Last weekend, I was on a fishing trip with my son, and we went to a lake that was about 3 hours away, drove through all these little towns, and it's in the middle of nowhere. And I noticed as I was driving through these little towns, they had nothing. They'd have one stoplight, but they all had a storage unit. And you would think, I used to think, I was like, oh, we have storage facilities in Nashville because, there's nowhere to put everything. People don't have garages. I mean, we do, but, they not enough room to build another one. No, out here in the country, they got as much land as they want, and they're still renting storage facilities. It's a funny.
I'm telling you, it's a conclusion I've come to. Yeah. Earlier, you mentioned the word risk, and you mentioned the cost of remaining safe and solving for security, right? There's a risk to reward ratio on all things.
Yes.
And that includes getting married, having children, driving a car every day to work, getting on an airplane. Whatever it is we're doing, there's a risk to all of these things, right? And so safety is a perceived condition. It doesn't exist. Each one of them just has a different level of risk to reward, return to risk ratio.
I love that. I love that. I mean, in trading, I've taught that for years. It's in a different context, but it's the same concept. You put up a little bit of risk. Here's the reward. And if that reward doesn't outweigh the risk, you don't take the trade. Well, we do that. You mentioned with driving, okay, what's the risk of driving? Well, you have an accident. What's the cost of that? Potentially death. I mean, I've made some pretty boneheaded financial decisions and I've never died. Clearly you haven't either. And yet, millions of Americans and millions of people around the world get in their vehicles every day and take on the risk of death for the reward of getting to go to work. I guess that's the reward. But, we talk about coming back to the financial piece and interest and that kind of safety. Somebody says, I want to put my money in a certificate of deposit, or I want to put it in a savings account where I know I'm going to get some guaranteed return. And that return is maybe 1.5%, 2% if you're lucky, right? You say, well, why is that safer than XYZ? Fill in the blank. And I have heard this a million times. It's insured. Okay, so you have this facade of FDIC insurance. If the bank goes belly up, they're going to return your $9,000 to you. Congratulations. But what was the cost of that safety to you? What is the cost of security, of guarantee? That's what people don't realize, because for 1.5% interest, you're going to earn over the course of a year on $100,000. You earn what? $1,500.
Yep, $1,500.
Okay, so where else can you put $100,000 and earn exponentially more than $1,500? And the answer is a lot of places, right? We'll do another episode on de-risking, but I want you to think about this. Just first reaction. You have the $100,000. You have two choices. Put it over here, and I'm going to get a guaranteed $1,500. It's guaranteed. I know I'm going to get my $100,000 back. Okay. In the process, you're losing to inflation, 7 or 8% behind, something in there. And you're also losing opportunity costs because you're not investing in other deals that you could make. Now, if you were sitting there saying, I'm going to take $100,000 and reallocate it somewhere, give me some ideas. What would you be thinking, Nelson? I know it's not going to be safe, but would it be worth the risk?
So, as you know, for the last 3 years, I've been personally involved in probably what is titled the biggest risk asset of all, which are cryptocurrencies, digital assets, artificial intelligence, bots specific. And in those 3 years, not only have I learned a lot because I've been able to travel to worldwide conventions and meet people that are in these spaces that have been in it longer than the 3 years I've been in it, meet people who've thrived and succeeded in these industries, but also been able to participate at a deep level where it's changed my personal life from being a builder and someone who's been a general contractor pretty much nationwide, and someone who's been involved in real estate for 25, 30 years or so, and truly redirected my entire perspective into this high risk, high reward area. And I'm not alone. I've followed, whether people are a fan of President Trump or not, I'm following what his sons are doing. And I happen to follow what some of the brighter brains are doing insofar as engineers and coders and entrepreneurs and risk takers and new startup companies, where they're going, the ones that have succeeded, the ones that are today some of the largest companies were startup ideas that started in a small rental space in the back of somebody's home, in a garage or whatever. I'm wildly interested in that particular segment because, again, it forces me to learn as much as I can about it. It forces me to, as to your point earlier, you mentioned de-risk, decentralize, de-risk. The D's left me. There's 5 D's. Decentralize, de-risk, diversify, divest, and there's another D, and my friends, I'll have to follow up on that with you. My point is, I bring all of that into whatever project I'm looking at, so that at the end I'm going in, even though it's a high risk industry and maybe a high risk project, but I'm going into it with eyes wide open, having analyzed as much as I could of it, and having vetted it insofar as leadership, global presence, what were their numbers last year, what are their goals, what's their plan for next month, next quarter, next year, next 3 years, next 5 years, next 10 years. Once I look at that and I vet it, I say, okay, this is pretty good. I like this. But I take it through this risk to reward ratio scenario.
Yeah, and the key here, I've heard for years people have said cryptocurrency is maybe the only opportunity we're going to get where somebody can truly go from just a few $100s to a liquid multimillionaire in a short period of time. But the journey for doing that is sometimes you watch your cryptocurrency go up, 10 times, 20 times, and then it collapses 50%. And then it goes up another 200, 300, 400%, and then it collapses 70%. And the average person says that's not safe. But I look at that and I say, maybe it doesn't feel safe. To me, that feels a lot safer than sticking my money in the bank and hoping that the Federal Reserve does something I like and gets inflation under control. To me, the idea that at least I have the potential for upside, that actually feels more safe to me because I have the opportunity to get out of the rat race over here. I don't have the opportunity over there. And you and I have talked about this so many times. You've done a lot with real estate. I've done a lot with, I've done some with real estate. I've done most of my most successes have come in online entrepreneurship. It's an area that a lot of people don't want to get into because they see it as risky. But I've always said the same thing about online business. Where else can I go start a business for less than $500 and have unlimited earning potential? And we've made multi-seven figures many, many times following that model over and over again. If I were to go back 20 years ago and have stuck with the decisions that people were trying to get me to make at the time, I would never have experienced all the stuff I've experienced. Now, I also maybe wouldn't have had some of the highs and some of the lows that I've experienced. But you know what? It's been an incredible journey. And here I am, almost 50 years old now, and I can look back and I can say, well, I've had a lot, I've lost a lot, I've had a lot, I've done all of it. And who can at least say that? Like, it's been an amazing journey, if nothing else, an adventure, right? And so, as we kind of bring this to a close for this first episode, I want to tap into this. A lot of what we're going to talk about and a lot of what you and I have discussed on the phone, the difference between those who break free and those who don't It really comes down to mindset. It comes down to how they look at the world. If you look at the top 1%, people say, oh, they inherited it. Actually, statistically, they didn't. It's less than 60%. It may be like 70, 80% of. I'll have to go back and get the stats. I wasn't prepared to talk about it. But if you look at the Forbes billionaires list, the smallest percentage is those who inherited it. Most billionaires are self-made billionaires. Most millionaires are self-made millionaires. The difference in 100% of the cases comes down to the mindset and the psychology. And more importantly, when people say, oh, I have to inherit it, look at the stats on the other side of it. According to the stats, within 3 generations, a multi-billionaire family, within 3 generations, more than 90% of those families are completely broke. They've lost all the money because they didn't have the mindset. They didn't know how to think about being wealthy. And so as we kind of set up this podcast and we, doing this first episode, and we're going to do a whole bunch more, that's what I want to leave our listeners with. And I want you to tag into this in just a second, but I want to leave them with this idea that your mindset is everything. How you think about money, how you think about success, how you think about wealth, and how you think about risk. The difference that makes the difference is how you think. That's why Napoleon Hill called the book Think and Grow Rich. Not work hard and grow rich, Nelson. It was think and grow rich, right? What do you want to add?
That is sorry, I didn't mean to jump in on top of that, buddy. So my background is my heroes and my mentors are my mom and dad. I come from an awesome guy who's an auto body man and an awesome woman who was a seamstress. And they're alive and healthy today. They're in their 80s or in their early 80s, and they're everything to me. But they taught me to work with my hands. They taught me to work hard and work long. And they taught me that the harder you work, the more likely you are to make it. And that goes back to the paradigm of that used to work. It used to work that if you work your tail off, you're going to get somewhere. Nowadays, I know a lot of folks who work 2 or 3 jobs, and they work very hard, and they're still barely making ends meet. But there's the other side of that, who I also have met a lot of folks who work 10 hours a week, and they're doing abundantly well. So that recipe of if you work hard, you net results no longer applies. Not in this new paradigm of rate of inflation, taxation, and our money can no longer work for us. So going back to, I just want to touch on inflation because you mentioned it a couple times. It's likely that within the political condition that we're in right now, regarding the war and regarding resources and energy and rare earth metals and so forth, it's likely that our rate of inflation will increase necessarily as we are country building, as we are doing whatever we're doing in other parts of the world. So we already know that our dollar is going to get skinnier as we move ahead. So the goal of this program is to help people through that process from the world of what was to the world that's coming. We're in that little gap right now, and we want to be able to give value, knowledge, and information to just regular people, because that's what you and I are. We're regular people, to get them to stop thinking about money insofar as, and maybe this could be the follow-up conversation we have, that we were taught to earn it, to save it, to spend it, and ultimately to buy a house with it. And when we do those 4 things in today's new world, we lock ourselves up, we chain ourselves, we bind ourselves unknowingly in an attempt to do what society defines as, this is the definition of happiness in America. And if we start looking at money differently, as a currency that actually flows, that we can't capture it and save it and hoard it, because when we do, just like water, if it doesn't ebb and flow, still water will rot and eventually it evaporates. And so too does our currency when it sits still through inflation.
Yeah.
So maybe this is a follow-up on that, because I can go into that in great detail. But yeah, changing the mindset of what we've taught that may or may not prove to be true.
Yeah, I really love that. And let's do our next episode on that. I have some good ideas for that. So when we're done with this, I'll share them with you. I want to just end this with the single thought for people to just kind of rest on, hold in their mind. The quality of your life is going to be directly in proportion to your thoughts. If you think wealthy, you can achieve wealth. If you think poverty, if you think safety, if you think security, you will achieve it. And so what I want to challenge people with is to ask yourself, what do I want? What do I want my reality to be? I'm not sitting here saying I didn't call this show Think Rich Radio because I think everybody should be unlimitedly wealthy. I do actually tend to think that because I think people who have money have the resources to do more wealth, or excuse me, to do more good in the world, and they can do that with their wealth. But I'm not saying that you need to be rich for the sake of being rich. What the key message here is you are a result of your thoughts. You're a result of the way that you put your intention out and the way that you put your energy into the world. And so if you want to be wealthy, if you want to be more secure, rather than focusing on safety, turn your attention to saying, how do people think that achieve success in a totally different way? And if you can start to think that way, and hopefully, the conversations that Nelson and I have and other guests we have on, it will help guide you. But if you can start to think that way, you're going to start to see it's a much bigger adventure, a lot more uncertainty, but the rewards are infinitely better. All right. Thank you, Nelson, for this conversation. Thank you for those of you at home listening. I look forward to connecting with you next time. And until then, I wish you the best. We'll talk to you soon.